Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajacharya Stotra Sata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, written by Satsvarup Das Goswami. We're on volume 2. We're on the chapter still entitled On the Bowery. Prabhupada is giving Bhagavad Gita lectures Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. And the young people who are coming to see him are mostly musicians and artists, intellectuals, people looking for some purpose in life outside of the mundane activities that they see that the people are engaging in this world. Some of them, most of them, we can say all of them, are engaged in taking psychedelic intoxication to help them in what they think will be a spiritual quest. So, by Krishna's arrangement, these young men and women, they were attracted to Srila Prabhupada. Being musicians and artists, they liked his kirtans, and they liked the fact that he was speaking from the Vedic literatures, because before that, no one was able to teach them about the spiritual science from India. So Prabhupada was speaking from Bhagavad Gita and how Krishna was encouraging Arjuna to fight. Arjuna did not want to fight. He didn't want to kill his relatives, and he felt that it would be better that he go in the forest and just meditate. At this point, some in the audience are filled with reservations. They are all opposed to the role of the United States in Vietnam, and this idea is very difficult for them. Like Arjuna, they want peace. So why is a Swami sanctioning war? He explains, yes, Arjuna's idea not to fight is good, but then Krishna, the Supreme Consciousness, instructs. Therefore, Arjuna's fighting is absolute. If we follow Arjuna, give up good and bad and act for Krishna, not for our sense gratification, then that is perfect, because Krishna is the Supreme Consciousness. To some in his audience, although his answer seems philosophically sound, it is not quite what they want to hear. Still, they want to know his political views. Does he support America's involvement in Vietnam? Is he anti-war? But Prabhupada is neither hawk nor dove. So in America, there are two different classes of politicians. One is called a hawk. We know what a hawk is. It's a gid here, where they attack. They attack, they're predators. They look for the weaker animals or birds, and they'll attack and eat them. And the other is a dove. A dove is a gentle bird, and they look for twigs and little bugs and things like that. They don't attack others. So the hawks, they find solution in war. And the doves, they find solution in peace. So they wanted to know whether Prabhupada was a hawk or a dove. Because here Krishna is insisting that Arjuna fight, and Arjuna didn't want to fight. He had no political motive behind his example of Krishna and Arjuna. His theme is simple and pure. Beyond the good and the bad is the absolute. And to act in accord with the absolute is also beyond good and bad. But they weren't going to give up on this. They wanted to know what was Prabhupada's opinion. But what about Vietnam? Does Krishna say to fight there? No, Swami answers. The Vietnam War is different from the Kurukshetra War. In the Battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna was personally present. Vietnam is different. But his audience has yet another objection. If he is not addressing the Vietnamese War, then why not? After all, this is 1966. If he isn't talking about the war, then what is his relevancy? What is the purpose of applying a philosophy that doesn't have anything to do with what your life is? The Swami replies that his message is actually the most urgent and relevant. The Vietnamese War was an inevitable karmic reaction. It was one symptom, not the whole problem. And only this philosophy, surrendered to the Supreme Consciousness, addresses the real problem. But for many, the reference to fighting is so emotionally charged that they can't go beyond the immediate politics of Vietnam to Prabhupada's real message of surrender to the Supreme Consciousness. They respect the Swami. They realize he's referring to a deeper philosophy. Yet the story of Arjuna and the war makes things difficult. The Swami nonetheless continues to refer to Arjuna's fighting as the classic example of Bhagavad Gita's basic teachings. It's not the basic teaching his audience is having difficulty with. It's the example. Prabhupada has deliberately handed his audience a volatile analogy. He hasn't come to join their peace movement, and he doesn't accept their short-sighted concept of peace. He confronts them. It is better to fight in Krishna consciousness than to live in a so-called peace devoid of God realization. Yes, the example is hard for them to accept. It makes them think. And if they do accept, then they might come near to understanding the absolute. So, at that time in America, it had begun in the 50s. All over the world, there was something going on called the Cold War. There were two different massive powers, and that was the communists. The communists included Russia and China. And the capitalists. The capitalists were America and the European countries. They had free trade. They saw people equally, whereas in the Russian countries there was dictatorship, and the people had to do according to what the government ordered them to do. And Russia and China, being way over in the Asian area, they were starting to take over different countries. After World War II, Russia took over many, many countries. Part of Poland and Hungary and many, many countries they took over. And China was moving down to Korea, and now they were moving, China was right on the border of a small country called Vietnam. Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, they're all together, just neighbors to India. So America wanted to protect these small countries from becoming under the influence of communism. And they took it upon themselves to so-called protect these countries. What actually happened was, in Vietnam, over 3 million Vietnamese civilians and soldiers were killed. And America sent so many of their young men there that nearly 60,000 young men were killed. Now, Prabhupada explains why this happened. In your country, the real policy to continue the Vietnam means they cannot manage these hippies, and they are trying to send them to Vietnam and kill them. This is how Prabhupada saw it, that all these young men who had become hippies, they didn't want to work, they were taking intoxication, they weren't following in the footsteps of their parents. So the government was taking them, forcing them into the army, sending them to Vietnam, and they were dying there for no purpose. That is the policy. They cannot manage. They cannot make them sane and normal condition. They have no such policy. Neither they do know it. So what to do? Blow them. Blow them means Prabhupada was speaking about when Prabhupada ran his pharmacy, the Prayag pharmacy in Allahabad. There used to be, the English were there. And some of the English men would come and speak to Prabhupada, different soldiers and administrators. So one of Prabhupada's friends, an Englishman, he explained that during the World War II, when the Germans took over France, they were killing everyone. And hundreds of women and children tried to escape. And they escaped to a country called Belgium. And in Belgium, there was a marshal named Marshal Foch. So when Marshal Foch saw all of these women and children by the hundreds coming to take shelter in Belgium, they had no shelter whatsoever, they were fleeing with nothing. He said, what am I going to do with all these women and children? So what did he do? He blew them up with bombs and killed them all. So Prabhupada says, blow him. We cannot manage them. Therefore, they are continuing, that's all. This is the policy. Do you think, What do you think? This is my suggestion. Unwanted persons, let them be finished, just like this Marshal Foch did. Unwanted refugees, blow them. And killing and blowing, this is very easy thing for the animal eaters, for the maintainers of slaughterhouse. So Prabhupada saw on such a different level that these young people couldn't understand. And then he goes on to explain more. At this time, you remember that Srila Prabhupada had begun his incorporation of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness with Mr. Stephen Goldsmith. He was a lawyer. And sometimes Mr. Goldsmith would come to Prabhupada's lectures. And he questioned Prabhupada. What is your opinion of this Vietnamese war where all of these young people are being sent and being killed for no reason? Looking right at Mr. Goldsmith, Swamiji immediately answered, you are daily killing so many animals. So God is saying, send your sons to the slaughterhouse. With this statement, he made it clear to his audience that he was not going to compromise his principles. Prabhupada could understand the law of karma. For God being the father of all living entities, he doesn't see a difference between the men and the animals. And if the men are killing the animals, by the law of karma, the animals will then kill the men. Just as with abortion, the mother is killing the baby in the womb, and then the baby in the womb will become the mother and kill that mother in her womb. Exact karma. Even in the Bible, which Prabhupada studied, the law of karma is there in the form of, there's one sloka, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever you do to one, that will come back to you. Mr. Goldsmith's question was symptomatic of the concern gripping millions of American youth. anti-Vietnam demonstrations, draft card burnings, and many other protests were going on all the time. So here we have, this was in 1966. I attended this. Thousands, lakhs and lakhs of people came to the capital of America in Washington, D.C. to demonstrate against the war, that the young men are being killed for no purpose whatsoever. And each young man, over 18, he got what was called a draft card. And if he wasn't a student, he was forced to go into the army, and he was trained in the army, and then he was flown to Vietnam to die. For instance, the devotee who collected the money to build our temple, his name is Guru Kripa Swami. Now he was drafted, forced to go into the army. And they want to know what type of a person you are. They interview you. He was telling me this, explaining this to me. So they asked him, if you see someone in a battle and they just got blown up, what would you do? Now, some people would run away. Some people would go and kill the other person. He said, I would go and try to help the person. So they made him into a medic. That means he didn't have to fight. He didn't have to have a gun and kill other people. He was part of the medical team. And even though he was part of the medical team, one day in Vietnam, a bomb exploded, or a grenade, and his whole nose got blown off. And they took him to where the medics were, and they're trying to figure out what to do about his nose. And the doctor asks him, what did you look like before? What kind of a nose did you have? And they tried to reconstruct his nose. They take skin from one place and put it, when he comes, you'll see, his nose is all flat like this because he lost his nose. And then Indradumna Swami, he had a patriotic spirit. He thought, yes, I'll fight for my country. And he joined the Marines. The Marines are like the top of the military. And he was being trained, and the whole group of men that he was being trained with is called a platoon. So the platoon was going to fly to Vietnam, and suddenly he got a very high fever. He got very sick, and he wasn't able to go on the plane. So he was kept back. When the platoon reached Vietnam, as soon as they arrived there, they blew up the airplane and everyone died. So when he heard that everyone in his platoon had been killed, he realized that God had saved him. And he left the military and became a devotee. Jayapataka Swami, he wouldn't fight, so he left America, gave up his country, went to Canada, and then came here to India in 1970. Many of the devotees did that. They took shelter, and then eventually, in November of 1966, after Prabhupada was able to get the incorporation of ISKCON, when he got the tax exemption, he was then able to give shelter to the young men who joined ISKCON, that they didn't have to enter into the army anymore. So then the young boys who became devotees, they were saved from being killed at Vietnam. Otherwise, everyone else was forced to go to Vietnam. We want to stop these killing houses. It is very, very sinful. That is why all over the world they have so many wars. Every 10 or 15 years there is a big war, a wholesale slaughterhouse for humankind. But these rascals, they do not see it, that by the law of karma, every action must have its reaction. You are killing innocent cows and other animals. Nature will take revenge. Just wait. As soon as the time is right, nature will gather all these rascals and slaughter them. Finished. They'll fight amongst themselves. Protestants and Catholics, Russia and America. Now we have how many different wars are going on now? Ukraine and Russia, North Korea, South Korea. Simply the arrangement of Krishna to get all the rascals together and kill them. It is going on. Why? That is nature's law. Tit for tat. You have killed, now you kill yourselves. They are sending animals to the slaughterhouse, and now they'll create their own slaughterhouse. And then Prabhupada, he was imitating a gun. Tung, tung, kill, kill. So this is what the young people who were sitting in front of Prabhupada, just like you're all sitting here, and Prabhupada was explaining that Krishna is telling Arjuna, no, you must fight. I want you to fight, because it was for a righteous purpose, a real, genuine reason why one should fight. And these people gradually, Prabhupada was explaining to them about the law of karma. And this was the philosophy. It was called the Domino Theory. And it's still going on even now. The Chinese are trying to infiltrate into India. They're trying to take over Nepal. They already have taken over Tibet, Mongolia. These were all separate countries before, but forcibly they took over these countries. And we have the example of North Korea and South Korea. There was a partition, just like India was partitioned for religious purposes, the Muslims and the Hindus. So in Korea, in Vietnam, and other countries, they cut the country in half. One half is communist, the other half is free. So that's what was going on in Vietnam. You have a game here called dominoes. You stand up the little pieces of wood, and when you hit one domino, all the other dominoes fall down. So this is called the Domino Theory, that when the communists can enter into one country, then boom, 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 then all the other countries in that area will become weakened, and they'll also fall to communism. So this downstairs picture, the U.S., so U.S. means America, USA, United States of America. So U.S., and they call U.S. Uncle Sam, U.S. And this is what Uncle Sam looks like. So in this cartoon, their Uncle Sam is trying to stop the dominoes from falling. So this was the political excuse they were using for entering into the Vietnam War, to stop communism from spreading to one country after another. Domino theory presents a metaphor of falling dominoes, that a rise or fall in communist influence in a country will have the same knock-on effect in neighboring countries, and so on. We have it right here in India, the Naxalites, the Ulfas, there's so many different, the guerrilla, the underground communist influence trying to take over the country. It was much stronger in the 1970s because of the influence of Russia in India. Now the country's become stronger, so there's not that much communist influence. But in the 1970s, it was very, very strong. And that's because of this domino theory. It was prominent in the United States from the 1950s to the 1980s in the context of the Cold War, suggesting that if one country in a region came under the influence of communism, then the surrounding countries would follow. It was used by successive United States administrations during the Cold War as justification for American intervention around the world. So this is the political reason why America entered the war of Vietnam. But Prabhupada saw the internal reason, that they wanted to get rid of all of the useless young hippies that they had no solution for. They couldn't make them sane, so they sent them to Vietnam to get killed. Prabhupada had the solution. Prabhupada took the same young men and stopped them from taking intoxication, meat eating, illicit sex, and gambling. He completely cleaned their lives up. Prabhupada had the solution. And that's what Prabhupada was giving to these young men and women who were coming to his classes. In a slaughterhouse, many animals are brought together expressly to be killed. So this whole material world is a slaughterhouse. And when there is need, many two-legged animals will be brought together into a war and killed. This place is a slaughterhouse. And yet the foolish two-legged animal is thinking, I am now very comfortably situated. He forgets, I'm going to be slaughtered. This is exactly what Arjuna saw when he saw the universal form. He saw all the soldiers rushing into Krishna's mouth and getting crushed by Krishna's teeth, just like Kitri. So this is what frightened him so much, to see this fearsome form of the Lord killing everything in the universe. Mritu Samsara Sagarat. This place is an ocean of slaughter. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna confirms it. Mritu Samsara Sagarat. This place is a slaughterhouse, but people are accepting it as their home. Another name for this material world is Mrityu Loka, the place of death. But still, people take it as a very comfortable place. This is their intelligence, accepting a slaughterhouse as a very nice place. So Prabhupada was quoting Bhagavad Gita 12:6-7. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me, and being devoted to me without deviation, engage in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So Prabhupada was trying to help these young people understand what it means to surrender to Krishna and how we don't belong in this slaughterhouse. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, because it's described that this universe, it's like a coconut. Very hard shell, you can't escape. And inside is darkness. And all of the living entities who are impregnated into this universe, how do they survive? They survive by eating one another. And the formula of this eating is described in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands. For instance, the plants, they don't have hands. We eat the plants. Those devoid of legs are prey for the four-legged. The weak are the subsistence of the strong. And the general rule holds that one living being is food for another. So here we are, we're caught in this dark universe, and the only way to survive is if we eat one another. That's the truth of this universe and taking birth in this Mrityu Loka. Exploitation of the weaker living being by the stronger is the natural law of existence. There is always an attempt to devour the weak in different kingdoms of living beings. There is no possibility of checking this tendency by any artificial means under material conditions. I have one special quote. Where's my... here. Yes. It can be checked only by awakening the spiritual sense of the human being. I didn't bring it. Okay. By practice of spiritual regulations. The spiritual regulative principles, however, do not allow a man to slaughter weaker animals on one side and teach others peaceful coexistence. So this is the hypocrisy of these people who were demonstrating for peace, holding big demonstrations and going on protests, but they were still eating meat. At the same time they're slaughtering, they want the slaughtering to be stopped. You can't stop the slaughter unless you stop eating and killing the animals. If you do not allow the animals peaceful coexistence, how can you expect peaceful coexistence in human society? So Prabhupada, he's still trying to help these young men and women, and he says, is it very difficult dovetailing our consciousness with the Supreme Consciousness? Not at all. Not at all. No sane man will say, oh, it is not possible. He isn't suggesting that to dovetail with the Supreme Consciousness, they will have to go to fight in Vietnam or perform some other horrible act on behalf of God. He knows that spiritual life will have to be more attractive than material life, or his audience will never take to it. He wants to bring the theme of dovetailing with the Supreme Consciousness down to something practical, something all attractive and beautiful, something anyone could do and would want to do. He wants to encourage them by saying that they can do their own thing, but for Krishna. Arjuna, after all, was a lifetime warrior, because we know that Arjuna, he was a Kshatriya. And Kshatriyas, just like in this country, there's a very strong Kshatriya spirit still, and that's why India has the best army in the entire world, because the people want to go into the army. They're fighting to get into the army because they have that Kshatriya spirit. So Arjuna, being a lifetime warrior, he had the spirit to fight for the right purpose. So Krishna wasn't telling him to do something that wasn't his nature. It was what Arjuna was meant to do. It was his occupation. He wants to encourage them by saying that they can do their own thing, but for Krishna. Arjuna, after all, was a lifetime warrior. Krishna didn't ask him to give up his work, but to do it for the Supreme. So Prabhupada is asking the same of his audience, and they can begin with something as simple as offering their food to God. Prabhupada explains this now. Because everyone has to eat, so God wants to eat something. Why don't you first offer your food to God? Then you eat. But you may say, but if God takes it away, then how shall I eat? No, no, God will not take it. Daily, after preparing our foodstuffs, we are offering to Krishna. There is a witness. Mr. David has seen, that was Prabhupada's roommate, Paul, and Prabhupada laughs. God eats, but his spiritual eating is such that even after his eating, the whole thing is still there. So we shall not suffer a pinch if we dovetail our desires with the Supreme Lord. We simply have to learn the art, how to dovetail. Nothing has to be changed. The fighting man did not change into an artist or a musician. If you are a fighting man, you remain a fighting man. If you are a musician, you remain a musician. If you are a medical man, you remain a medical man. Whatever you are, you remain. But dovetail it. If by my eating the Lord is satisfied, then that is my perfection. If by my fighting the Lord is satisfied, then that is my perfection. So in every sphere of life, we have to know whether the Lord is satisfied. That technique we have to learn. Then it is as easy as anything. We have to stop creating our own plans and thoughts and take the perfect plans from the Supreme Lord and execute them. That will become the perfection of our life. And Lord Chaitanya has made acting on the platform of consciousness very easy. Just as there are some note makers of school books, let's say if you have to study a very thick book, so you can go to the bookshops, the stationery shops, and you buy a little thin book, like the general knowledge books, that tells you all of the main topics in that big thick book. So those are called study notes. So Prabhupada says, just as there are some note makers of school books, easy study, so Lord Chaitanya has recommended that you be engaged in whatever occupation, but just hear about Krishna. Prabhupada made one of these study books. The Chaitanya Charitamrita, originally it was 17 volumes long. It's very big. They were printing just a certain number of books because the devotees were printing it. Now it's 9 volumes, very thick volumes. So Prabhupada, because he didn't know whether he was going to live long enough at the time, he took this Chaitanya Charitamrita and he made a very small book called Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ka Siksham. So all of those 9 volumes were condensed into one volume, so that you could get the essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya in that one volume. So this is what Lord Chaitanya did in his own teachings. We have to stop creating our own plans. That will become the perfection of our life. And Lord Chaitanya, yes, it is for this that we are trying to organize this institution. So Lord Chaitanya has recommended that you be engaged in whatever occupation, but just hear about Krishna. Continue to hear the Bhagavad Gita and chant Hare Krishna. It is for this that we are trying to organize this institution. So you have come, and whatever work you do, it comes clear. Whatever work you do, it doesn't matter. Everything will be adjusted by and by as our mind becomes clear simply by hearing. If you continue this process, chanting the Krishna name, you will practically see how much your heart is becoming clear and how much you are making progress towards spiritual realization, the real identity of pure consciousness. So we've been hearing over the past few weeks about the transformation of Mr. Michael Grant, how he first was recommended by one of his friends that there's a Swami in the Bowery, and his friend wrote down the address, and Michael came to one of his classes, and then Michael wanted to test the Swami, Prabhupada, and he went alone when nobody else was there. He threw pennies at the window, we heard. Prabhupada came down and opened the door. And Prabhupada had all the time in the world for Michael to answer his questions. And then Michael offered his tambura, and he bought Prabhupada's 3 Srimad Bhagavatam volumes. And those volumes helped him so much, he carried Prabhupada's books wherever he went. So this is a gradual transformation. Prabhupada never told Michael to give up your occupation as a musician. He simply added Krishna consciousness, the books, the philosophy, the chanting of Hare Krishna. And Michael, through this process, automatically and naturally, without any over-endeavor, became purified. And we'll hear more today about that. So, Prabhupada is speaking on behalf of the Supreme Consciousness, and he offers his day-to-day activities as an example of dovetailing with the Supreme. Now Prabhupada explains in his own life how he has dovetailed. I am here always working at something, reading or writing, something, reading or writing 24 hours. Simply when I feel hungry, I take some food. And simply when I feel sleepy, I go to bed. Otherwise, I don't feel fatigued. You can ask Mr. David whether I am not doing this, because his roommate, Paul, was watching what Prabhupada was doing. So Prabhupada was busy all day and night with writing. He had a typewriter, with studying. When he had a little hunger, then he would cook a little something in his cooker. He would take a few hours of rest at night and then go on with his writing. Of course, the Swami's daily routine doesn't require certification from David Allen, and any of his regular visitors can see that he is transcendental. His personal life is a perfect example of dovetailing with the Supreme Consciousness. Prabhupada has always kept himself dovetailed with the Supreme. He had been perfectly dovetailed in Vrindavan also, and had no personal need or motive to come to America and live on the Bowery. It was for others' sake that he came to the Bowery, and it is for others' benefit that he is speaking tonight. His spiritual master and Lord Krishna want the conditioned souls to come out of their illusion before it is too late. Speaking vigorously, even until he becomes physically exhausted, sometimes shouting, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing. He gives his audience as much as he feels they can take. As the emissary of Krishna and the disciplic succession, he can boldly shout that everyone should dovetail with the Supreme. He can speak as strongly as he likes, for as long as they're willing to listen. He is a sadhu. The Sanskrit word means saint and one who cuts, sadhu. And he repeats the same message that for thousands of years sadhus of the original Vedic culture have spoken. He is reviving the eternal spirit of the Vedic wisdom to cut the knots of ignorance and illusion. So everything is illusion from the beginning of our birth. This is Prabhupada speaking. He's telling these young people, everything is illusion from the beginning of our birth. And that illusion is so strong, it is very difficult to get out. The whole thing is illusion. Birth is illusion. The body is illusion. The bodily relationship and the country are illusion. The father is illusion. The mother is illusion. The wife is illusion. The children are illusion. Everything is illusion. And we are contacting that illusion, thinking we are very learned, advanced. We are imagining so many things, but as soon as death comes, the actual fact, then we forget everything. We forget our country, we forget our relatives, we forget our wife, children, father, mother. Everything is gone. So this Prabhupada's, he's speaking like this to these young men and women, but he's speaking like this for us also, so that we can remember this philosophy and not become attached all over again. So now we're going to catch up with Prabhupada's diary, because Prabhupada's diary is exactly the same as what's going on here. And we'll read about that now, up until the end of June, if we have time. On Monday, June 13th, today in the morning class, there was some discussion on friendship and discipleship with Mr. Paul. I could not go out because Paul was not in. So we remember that on May 28th, that was when Paul came to attack Prabhupada. And from that time, Prabhupada could understand that Paul was not in his right senses, and Prabhupada was thinking he wanted to leave because he felt that Paul, if he again becomes violent, what would Prabhupada do? So Prabhupada, out of necessity, he was still staying there, and Paul was still doing small errands for him, but Prabhupada was looking for another place to stay. He knew he had to get out of that place, because of Paul's misbehavior. Paul would sometimes just disappear, so Prabhupada wouldn't be able to leave the room. 2 letters received, one from Chandrasekhar and the other from the Indian Embassy, Washington, D.C. Good. Prabhupada's trying to get that exchange from India to America for the money. In the evening, there was meeting. The attendance was 9 only, but the collection was the poorest and at the same time the highest, because somebody paid in the basket $100. Total contribution, $103. There was book collection, $2, $105. There was no expenditure today. At night, Carl remained with us. So Carl Jurgens, because when Prabhupada had to flee that night, he had nowhere to go, he went to Carl's home. And Carl would now sometimes come and stay with Prabhupada just to make sure that everything would be okay there. He was really trying to help Prabhupada. June 14th, Ekadasi. In the morning class, Carl, Nelson, and Paul attended the class. Book collection, $7. Paul paid for expenditure, $1. No letter received, and bank deposit, $120. At night, at about 3 o'clock, Paul left this place, intimating Carl that he would be away for 2 days. So Paul was just getting worse and worse, and fortunately Carl was there to protect Prabhupada. Carl deposited money at the telephone office. It is expected that next week by Tuesday, there will be telephone connection in my name. $40 paid by Paul for such deposit. So, just as well, now we don't have it anymore, but there used to be telephone lines here, and the telephone company, and we had downstairs in the reception one telephone, number 178, and that one telephone was what the whole temple used. So in America also, in those days, there was just one telephone company. It was named after the inventor who discovered how to make telephones, Alexander Graham Bell. So the American telephone system in those days was called Bell System, New York Telephone Company. And Prabhupada, he had already applied, he wanted a phone, although he was trying to find someplace else, he had to go through with the application. Carl paid $1 for expenditure. Paul was absent the whole day and night. In the evening there was meeting. There were about 12 heads, but the contribution was $5.50 only. The other day, $100 contribution is understood to be made by Carl. It is to be paid to Mr. Goldsmith for registration expenses. So when Mr. Goldsmith agreed to do the registration of ISKCON for Prabhupada, he said there would be 2 expenditures. $100 would go to the New York City government, and $200 would go to him for his lawyer fees. So Carl paid $100 for the registration. Thursday, June 16th. Today, Carl was paid 75 cents for expenses and $100 withdrawn from bank for incorporation charges to be paid Mr. Goldsmith. Purchase of typewriter ribbon, fountain pen cartridges. Total expenditure such and such. So Prabhupada's making some progress, and fortunately, some of his students, such as Carl and Michael, they were willing to help Prabhupada. Friday, June 17th. Now Paul has come back. Paul was paid today $1 for expenditure. In the evening, Mr. Smith, press representative, a friend of Carl, came to see me. So this Mr. Smith, we had seen pictures of this before. He had heard about Swamiji, and he was from the Village Voice. The Village Voice was the local newspaper that the young people would read. And Mr. Smith came to interview Prabhupada, and Mr. Smith was very impressed by Prabhupada. Because this happened a little bit before in the Lilamrita, we had read about it. He was very impressed because Prabhupada had come, he was completely poverty-stricken, and he had come with the mission to help these downtrodden young people in America. It was such selflessness that Mr. Smith was truly impressed by him. And Prabhupada asked him very simple questions. How can he do this? And when Mr. Smith saw how Prabhupada was living so simply, he realized that this is a genuine spiritual person. So he wrote a wonderful article about Prabhupada and took pictures of Prabhupada, and that was one of Carl's friends. So he took note of my activities, took one set of books. His girlfriend gave me the following address. This was a professor of philosophy at Mary Washington College of Virginia, specializing in Oriental philosophy. So Prabhupada probably wrote to this professor. Mr. Goldsmith hanged the notice on the door to be so remained for 15 days in terms of the law. It is expected that the incorporation will take place sometimes after the 6th of July. In the evening there was meeting. The collection was only $7 and book collection $16. Expenditure $1. So now they're going through the formalities of the incorporation. A sign had to be hung at Prabhupada's official address, which was now in the Bowery, for 15 days. But Prabhupada was going to move before those 15 days were over, and they had to change the address to 26 2nd Avenue. Prabhupada also had to move his phone to 26 2nd Avenue. Saturday, 18th June. Today Paul was paid $1. The Sanskrit class was poorly attended by 2 only. So you remember that Prabhupada was not very anxious to teach Sanskrit. He used the Sanskrit teaching to teach them slokas about Krishna. And because Sanskrit, it takes 20 years to learn Sanskrit. They started out strong, there were 10 people, and within a month's time, now only 2 people were still in the class. 1 letter received from Vrindavan, that's Prabhupada's son, and other letter received from Tirtha Maharaj. Vrindavan's letter replied and posted by Don. Mr. Paul Murray prepared his daily routine work. Let me see how does he follow it. He is a problem for me. Let Krishna help him to become good behaved. So Sunday, Prabhupada only had that one love feast on that one Sunday, because Prabhupada realizes that he's not going to be able to stay much longer with Paul. Monday, June 20th. In the evening there was meeting, 16 persons attended, and the contribution was only $9, book collection $125. One artist has drawn a picture of Sri Radha Krishna. You'll see that in the pictures, it's a round picture. So I have hanged it over the present Lord Chaitanya's picture, above Lord Chaitanya. It is looking nice. 1 letter received from Mangal Niloy. That was the brahmachari from Assam who was thinking of joining Prabhupada and helping him. Post office man has called on Thursday for post boxes. Tuesday, June 21st. Today I paid Paul $5 for purchases. Carl paid me $30 for paying rent. Today telephone connection is made. I talked with Mr. Bogart and Mrs. LeBlanc, because now we haven't heard those names for quite some time. Since Prabhupada moved to the Bowery, he hasn't had much contact with Mr. Bogart. And Mrs. LeBlanc was one of Dr. Mishra's students from way up at 72nd Street. None of those people followed Prabhupada down to the Bowery. Dr. Mishra twice attempted, but there was no response. And Prabhupada gives his telephone number. So this 212 means Manhattan area. And then the 7-digit number comes after that. Paul's behavior is not very satisfactory. No letter received today. One letter written to Paragon Book Gallery. That was where Prabhupada was storing his books and they were selling them. Wednesday, 22nd June. Today Paul was paid $225 for expenses, withdrawn from bank $65 and sent to the landlady. $100 by money order check, commission paid, 25 cents. That was for the registration to Mr. Stephen Goldsmith. Theosophical Lodge at 347 East 72nd kept one set of books on approval. My phone number given to them. They will inform about consulting Madame Wadia of Bombay, who is now at New York. No letter received today. Institute of Religions and Social Studies at Broadway invited me to see at 10:30 a.m. with books. So Srila Prabhupada, despite his regular class giving and his writing, he's still reaching out, trying to find institutions where he can place his books. And he was doing this all alone. In the evening there was meeting, the attendance was 11, but the collection was only $750. June 23rd. Today one set of books deposited with the director of the Institute of Religions and Social Studies. It is settled that the director will directly deposit the value in the bank. So Prabhupada had to go there by subway and bus, both. Mike proposed to become a Vaishnava and married with his girlfriend. So this is a great, great milestone for Mr. Michael. After reading Prabhupada's books and regularly attending his classes, he's become purified to the point where he's thinking of becoming a Vaishnava, and he's even thinking of marrying his girlfriend. Today, while I was about to go to Carl's place, Paul implored me that if required, he would go away. This loft is mine. I was pleased to hear all of these from the young boy. So I stopped leaving of this place. Carl took the trouble of bringing back my bags. So Prabhupada was making a genuine attempt to get out of there because of Paul. And Paul now, he realizes that and trying to change his behavior. So this is what happened. This is all being, I've copied it from Miracle on 2nd Avenue. This is Carl. When Prabhupada went to Carl's place, Carl brought him to Michael's house. The Swami needs a better place to live because Paul's getting out of hand. That's Carl speaking. And Michael says, what do you mean? He's just getting hard to live with. You know, he swears, acts weird, disappears for hours on end, and he's rude, loud, and unpredictable. You know, he's just weird. He shrugged his shoulders. Weird to live with anyway, at least for the Swami. Paul had always struck me as, this is Michael Mukunda speaking to us. Paul had always struck me as immature and without direction. Still, he didn't seem particularly difficult to me. A bit odd, maybe, but everyone was in some way. Carl says, so how can we help the Swami? I was silent. The Swami, perhaps sensing my lack of concern, began to tell me about Paul's unusual behavior. In India, the Swami continued, we have a saying, Guru Mara Vidya. You sit opposite the Guru, learn from him everything, then you kill him, move his body aside, and sit in his place, and then you become Guru. He paused. Paul is a very dangerous man. As the Swami said this, he looked right through me. I felt a shiver down my spine. Paul seemed utterly subservient to the Swami, almost like a slave who lacked a mind of his own. But as the words left the Swami's mouth, I began to think that maybe Paul's peculiar mindless demeanor was his own problem, part of his psychological state, whatever that was, and not part of his being a follower of the Swamis. He certainly seemed unbalanced, and if he was taking heavy doses of drugs, maybe he could be capable of violence. It occurred to me that Paul was quite possibly a dangerous man, especially for a small, elderly Indian Swami. I looked up. So you need a new place, right? That's it, said Carol. I felt a little guilty and very uneasy. Was the Swami asking me indirectly if he could appropriate my place, turn it into a temple, and me into a Paul replacement? I wasn't ready for that. People play drums here, sometimes late at night, I said hastily. There are always musicians hanging around here, but maybe I can help. Carl said, well, for now, the Swami can stay at my place. So we'll stop here because it's after 7 o'clock, and we can see that these two students of Srila Prabhupada, Carl and Michael, they're now realizing the danger that Prabhupada is living with, and they're going to try to help Prabhupada find a new place for his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Hare Krishna. Jai.